Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Renewed demonstrations in Saudi Arabia's al-Qatif press for political reforms. Palestinian youth hold economic protests demanding the downfall of the Paris Agreement. And thousands of Tunisians rally against the remnants of the old regime. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
In eastern Saudi Arabia's city of al-Qatif, a protest was held to demand an end to oppression and the release of political prisoners, in particular religious scholar Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr. Protesters marched on the city's streets, confirming that the authorities must guarantee freedom and justice in its dealings with the residents of the area.
With this slogan, a large demonstration was held in the eastern Saudi Arabian region of al-Qatif and was attended by thousands of residents. The protest was peaceful and included all segments of the society. The protesters took to the city's streets, chanting slogans demanding the release of political prisoners, notably religious scholar and imam of al-Awamiyya Mosque, Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr. They stressed their commitment to resisting the Saudi authorities' crackdown. The protesters did not only demand the release of political prisoners, and specifically Sheikh al-Nimr, but they also demanded political reforms based on justice and freedom in governance, and equality between the different sects and social classes. They believe this would lead to an improvement to the deteriorating situation the society is experiencing due to the authorities' oppressive and abusive practices. At the end of the protest, a clear and transparent closing statement was issued, explaining the banners raised during the demonstration and providing the protesters' outlook at the situation and the ruling system. Two developments distinguish the latest demonstration in al-Qatif. First, the growing number of participants from the general public, including from different social classes. And second, the shattering of the barrier of fear imposed by the Saudi authorities on the residents of the region and its cities. Fear was created by liquidating and arresting activists and those taking part in the demonstrations and protests that started last year. The presence of police and army forces, the closing of the city's entrances, and the wide-scale deployment of those forces to nearby towns and cities failed to frighten the residents. Not even the crackdown or the use of live bullets, which led to the martyrdom of 12 people since the start of the protests, kept them away. In addition, they have been subjected to an arrest campaign that targeted the leaders and symbols of the protests, such as Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr and dozens of others.
Participants in a protest called for by the youth against the high cost of living in Hebron demanded the Palestinian government subsidize basic goods and set a minimum wage in both the public and private sectors.
For the fourth time, young activists are protesting here in the Ibn Rushd Square in central Hebron against the difficult economic conditions and the high price of goods, and especially basic goods.
As youth, our first demand is to live in dignity, to be able to live. We are unemployed youth. We have the best diplomas in the Arab world, but we are unemployed. The youth can't eat. The youth can't get married. The youth can't do anything. They can't even take a single step forward.
I am demonstrating for the Palestinian people and for the Palestinian youth because the unemployment rate for young people in Palestine is 80%. Talking is not enough. We are asking the Palestinian government to provide a livelihood for the people.
The protest was held following calls by the youth against the high cost of living on the social networking site Facebook and was attended by many citizens from across the province.
The cost of living is really high, and so is the university's tuition. I paid all my tuition by taking loans. We can't afford to eat if we want to pay our tuition.
The demonstrators asked the Palestinian government to decrease the price of goods, to review the Paris Economic Agreement, and to set a minimum wage for both the public and private sectors by taking into account the high cost of living.
Everything is now expensive, even food and fuel. Only the value of human life keeps decreasing.
The wave of high prices comes as the occupation is still taking hold of our people, leading the burden to be placed on the shoulders of the citizens. The demonstrations and marches in the city of Hebron are ongoing against the high cost of living, amid confirmations by the protesters that they will continue their popular mobilization until they attain their demands. Sari Aloud, Palestine TV, Hebron.
Another mass rally in Jordan. Thousands of people are out on the streets calling for the resignation of the government. The protesters want a march, that is, after the Friday prayers, to demand an end to widespread corruption. They accuse the government of failing to fight corruption and implement reforms. Their calls for reform have not leveled off despite rapid government changes. The country has had 4 separate governments since a series of uprisings erupted in the Arab world in 2010. Public discontent has been on the rise as civilians are grappling with rising food and living costs. Jordan is the 4th poorest country in the Arab world. Thousands of people demonstrate in Tunisia demanding a purge of all remnants of the former regime. The protesters gathered outside the government headquarters in the capital, Tunis. They called for administrative purges in the media, judiciary, as well as the political opposition. The party of the ousted President Zain al-Abidine Ben Ali, known as RCD, is still playing an active role in the politics of Tunisia. The popular uprising toppled Ben Ali's regime in January of last year. Bahraini protesters take to the streets in yet another show of defiance against the government. They're demanding freedom and the downfall of the al-Khalifa regime. The demonstration was held in Sanad village south of the capital, Manama. The protesters also called for the release of political prisoners. The Manama regime has detained thousands as part of the crackdown on dissent. Scores of others have been killed, many of them under torture while in custody. Anti-regime rallies in Bahrain erupted in February of last year. Saudi troops have been lending a hand to Bahraini forces in dealing with the protesters. The Kashmiri government has rejected a public request to investigate mass graves found on its soil. Many think an inquiry could have shed light on the fate of thousands of missing people in Kashmir. The government's decision has sparked public outrage. Shanabat has more.
Despite repeated demands by the relatives of those disappeared in Kashmir, Kashmir's government has adamantly denied DNA testing into the issue of mass graves. The report of Home Department says all those buried in the graves were militants, and if families want DNA tests, they would have to identify both the graveyard and the exact grave where they think their disappeared relatives were buried. The report also said the random collection of DNA from the graves would be an academic exercise that would hurt the local sentiments. This government statement has faced harsh criticism by civil society, accusing.
What is very ridiculous is that they are saying that the family, meaning the victim, should identify the grave. He should go to the place and tell police that this is the grave, it should be reopened. How would victim know? If they know that where the graves are, then they are not unidentified graves.
The Association of Parents of Disappeared Persons of Kashmir say there are about 8,000 to 10,000 people who have disappeared over the past 2 decades of low-intensity conflict. The report by the government was a response to investigation by State Human Rights Commission into mass graves, confirming last year that 38 burial sites in the north of the Himalayan territory contained 2,156 unidentified bodies. The Human Rights Commission said 574 other bodies found in the graves were identified as local residents, and it urged widespread DNA testing. The Commission denied government's usual claims, saying those buried are foreign militants killed in fighting Indian rule in conflict-ridden Kashmir.
Once a degree of normalcy gets created within Kashmir, they presume that Kashmiris have abandoned their sentiments and they take them for granted and start to pursue the same type of assimilationist policies which they have been pursuing continuously and which have been failing continuously. So they don't seem to have learned any lessons from history nor the events that have occurred over here. This is the tragedy.
Kashmir is the longest pending dispute between nuclear-armed rivals India and Pakistan, both claiming the region and rule it in parts, and have fought 2 full-blown wars over the issue. Observers here say the government fears such an investigation might attract great media attention and intrigue disorder in the region. But it seems public opinion is not happy with reports like this and insists on what it sees as its legal right to know facts on the ground. Shahana Bhatt, Press TV, Indian administered Kashmir.
2 large explosions rocked the Damascus neighborhoods of Rukn al-Din and Mezeh. The Syrian Observatory said hundreds of soldiers raided the town of Babila. As for Damascus, it replied in a video to the statements by Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi.
As Friday prayers were ending and worshippers were leaving al-Rukniya Mosque in the Damascus neighborhood of Rukn al-Din, a bomb planted on a motorcycle near the mosque caused a large explosion. According to state TV, it led to the death of 5 members of the security forces and injured others. In only a matter of hours, Syrian TV announced the explosion of a car bomb placed between the Justice Palace and the Information Ministry on the Mezeh Highway in Damascus. The official Syrian channel didn't speak about a loss of life, but only reported the material damage to the cars on site. These explosions come after activists called for holding demonstrations after Friday prayers in a number of Syrian cities against the rule of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. At the same time, Syrian state TV reported that regime forces are continuing to cleanse the area of the eastern Ghouta farms in the countryside of Damascus from armed groups, saying the forces found tunnels in Deir al-Asafir in Damascus. From the opposition's camp, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights announced clashes are continuing in the capital Damascus and in Aleppo and Homs. Rami Abdulrahman, the president of the observatory, revealed that hundreds of soldiers with military vehicles, cars and buses stormed the town of Babila near Damascus. He also said that regime forces arrested dozens of young men in the Kazaz area southeast of the capital. Politically, the statements made by Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi on the Syrian crisis are still generating reactions. After the Syrian Foreign Ministry's sharp criticism of Morsi's speech, describing it as a grave interference in its internal affairs, Syrian Deputy Foreign Minister Faisal al-Mikdad went even further. He held the Egyptian president responsible for the bloodshed in Syria. He said in a discussion on state TV that his country positively considers any initiative that wishes to offer assistance to contain the crisis and to return normal life to Syria's streets and cities. He said the Troika initiative that was discussed and includes Egypt was killed by the Egyptian president due to his latest stand.
I think the speech was neither rational nor balanced and doesn't represent a true understanding of what is happening in Syria.
As for the Turkish government, it had its share of al-Mikdad's attacks.
The Turkish government's hands are stained with the blood of Syrians, and we believe that the Turkish people will judge this government.
On the international front, during a conference in Ankara titled The Arab Spring and Peace in the Middle East, Muslim and Christian Perspectives, Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan warned of what he called killings based on religious identity in Syria. He viewed the Karbala events as being replicated in Damascus, calling for wise leadership in the transitional phase. This comes as Russia, through its foreign minister Sergei Lavrov, renewed its opposition to any attempt to adopt a resolution at the UN Security Council that would lead to foreign intervention in Syria.
Western spy agencies suspect that embattled Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has given the order to disperse his chemical and biological weapons stockpile throughout the country. Officials believe that Syria has several hundred tons of deadly material and that it has been scattered to as many as 20 cities. The Washington Post reported that the West has deep concerns about the ability to secure the arsenals in the event of Assad's regime's collapse. The stockpile appears to be larger and more widely distributed than originally suspected. European Union foreign ministers gather in Cyprus today to explore how to best assist the Syrian opposition while diffusing a humanitarian crisis in the war-shattered country. The meeting follows talks in Cairo between several Western foreign ministers and the head of the Arab League, Nabil al-Arabi, and the Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi. Italy condemned the ongoing massacres in Syria, while Australia stressed the need to the Syrian opposition to stop its squabbling and join together.
We urge the Syrian opposition to unite and unite behind a program for a transition to government that would make it more likely the world can support the opposition, and it makes it more likely that when the Assad regime falls, which it will, there can be fast progress towards a democratic, sovereign Syria.
On the international agenda, a deep concern which has been shared today on the Syrian crisis. It is unacceptable, the continuation of the massacre, and it was interesting to listen to the idea which was floated in Mecca and then reiterated in Cairo at the Arab League meeting of a creation of a group of 4 countries led by Egypt, including Turkey, Saudi Arabia and Iran, to try to move the negotiation on the aftermath of the present regime.
Defense Minister Ehud Barak held a high-level meeting with Admiral James Winterfeld, the Vice Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff. Top of the agenda was the nuclear threat from Tehran. Afterwards, Barak hinted to party supporters last night that he believed that the United States would join Israel in any military strike to prevent the hardline Islamic Republic from obtaining nuclear weapons. Barak said Jerusalem and Washington understand the danger of an atomic Iran, though our timetables are not the same and we have our differences, he said. Barak praised the Americans for deploying additional forces in the Persian Gulf, a measure he described as the utmost importance. But the defense minister stressed that, in the final analysis, it is the government of Israel that will decide how to act. 18 of the 21 Eritreans stuck at the southern border will be sent back to Egypt, while 2 women and a boy will be allowed to enter the country and be brought to the Negev detention center. Officials in the Prime Minister's office said the decision was made at the highest levels and was a humanitarian solution to the problem. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the move was necessary and that it was very important that Israel no longer be a destination for migrants. The Prime Minister said that the construction of the fence on the Sinai border has already cut infiltrators by 90%, and that the government will continue its efforts to return infiltrators to their countries of origin. Meretz MK Zahava Galon slammed the decision, saying turning them back could lead them into being harmed by Bedouin smugglers in the Sinai. Staying with Egypt, Defense Minister Barak has announced that he will be seeking legislation to allow the government to close the border into the Sinai and to bar Israelis from entering at times of high terror warnings. Barak said this was needed since there were some Israelis who ignore warnings about traveling to the peninsula, and Israel wants to lower the possibilities of having to deal with kidnappings and terror attacks against its citizens. His announcement came a day after the Counterterrorism Bureau reissued a travel advisory about entering Sinai.
A number of citizens were martyred and injured after 3 booby-trapped cars exploded. The explosions targeted people praying in 3 Husayniyat in Kirkuk province.
The first car exploded near the Imam Ali Husseiniya in the center of the city. The second one exploded near al-Mustafa Husseiniya in the Ras Domiz area, and the third near Khazal Husseiniya in the area of Ahmed Aka.
The explosions that surrounded the office of Martyr al-Sadr in Kirkuk did not hinder the preliminary elections, which were held at the same time as Friday prayers. A number of people were injured in the explosion that targeted the election center. The aim is to sow chaos and fear amongst the residents and cause the failure of this democratic experience that pushes forward the country's development and advancement. It is worth noting that the Kirkuk city center witnessed a series of explosions that claimed the lives of a number of people and caused injuries, especially at the al-Mustafa Husseiniya in the southern part of the city.
The explosion that coincided with the preliminary elections targeted the citizens' freedom and targeted the real foundation of the state. Frankly, these explosions did not happen in our office or in our Husseiniya. They happened in many Husainiyat in Kirkuk province.
I don't know why someone would do this. We don't. This is an inhumane act. We are performing Friday prayers, obeying God's will, and they targeted us like this.
Since the early morning, a large number of civilians visited the office of Martyr al-Sadr to choose who will represent them in the upcoming local elections, in which there are 6 candidates from the city, districts, and sub-districts.
The issue of preliminary elections is similar to a preliminary exam for a main exam. This is where people get to know these candidates and what is worthy and what isn't, so people form a strong opinion.
The preliminary election process at the office of Martyr al-Sadr is considered a positive step ahead of choosing candidates that are able to fulfill the aspirations of the citizens to have a bright future in a new Iraq. The prominent trait of the preliminary elections was manifested in the implementation of the foundations and principles of the democratic process. In addition, it helped citizens choose who will represent them in the next term. Mohammed Tigara, Al-Iraqiya, Kirkuk.
In Istanbul, an international conference titled The Arab Awakening and Peace in the New Middle East, Muslim and Christian Perspectives, opened today. It was attended by Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan and a number of religious figures and experts. The conference discusses the Arab people's revolutions in the Middle East and North Africa that some view as a decisive turning point in modern history.
The Arab Awakening and Peace in the New Middle East is a conference that looks into the role Muslim and Christian societies and their religious leaders play in turning risks into opportunities and in establishing religious and social harmony in the new Middle East. The conference includes prominent religious leaders and experts from Arab countries, the Middle East and Turkey, who will look into Muslim-Christian relations in the Arab region's current stage. It's an attempt to imagine a shared future removed from the battles for religious identity.
We must sit down and try to find answers together to the many questions being raised right now. We must do so away from the rowdy and noisy culture that is unfortunately plaguing the scene at the moment.
Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan spoke about the conflict in Syria and compared to what happened in Karbala nearly 1,400 years ago to what is happening in Syria today. He described the events that occurred in both cases as religiously prohibited.
Very frankly, what happened nearly 1,300 years ago in Karbala is the same thing happening today in Syria. We are now witnessing an oppressive regime and an unmerciful dictator in Syria. He kills his people with heavy weapons, and there are those who not only turn a blind eye to his actions, but also help him for sectarian reasons.
Erdogan stressed that the popular mobilization in the Arab world is a natural result of the people's desire for freedom, but that suppression of this movement is abnormal. Erdogan denied that what is happening is a result of foreign intervention. He also assured that it's impossible for change to be implemented quickly and that the people in the Arab world must be patient with the new regimes they choose.
The events happening in the Middle East and North Africa are not a result of foreign intervention. It is a natural development, exactly like a river that flows in its stream.
A number of Muslim and Christian clerics spoke at the conference, as well as Amin el-Gemayel, the leader of the Lebanese Phalangist Party, who warned against transforming the new regimes that came to power after the Arab awakening in some Arab countries to new dictatorships. The conference is one of several Turkey hosted in the past year to look into multiculturalism, and according to the organizers of the conference, it aims to establish a world where coexistence prevails and a region that is dominated by justice and peace. Hayam Yaqub, BBC.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincoat Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic. Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.